The billionaire's office was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the faint ticking of a grand clock on the wall. He leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, staring at the skyline beyond the massive glass windows. The city lights stretched endlessly, glittering like a sea of stars. But none of it brought him joy. Only success, power, and wealth surrounded him. Yet there was a hollowness he could never shake from the outside. He had everything anyone could dream of. Cars that gleamed in the sun, a mansion that seemed like a palace, and bank accounts that could buy entire cities. But inside, he felt an emptiness that no amount of money could fill. He had built his empire with determination and hard work, sacrificing friendships, simple joys, and family bonds along the way. Success had been his goal for so long that he didn't even remember the last time he laughed freely or spent time with someone who loved him for who he was. He glanced at the framed pictures on his desk. A few formal awards, a luxury watch, a sleek pen gifted by some world leader. Yet there was no photograph of family smiling, no memory frozen in a frame to remind him of warmth, only achievements that made him proud but never complete. The phone rang occasionally, bringing calls from business partners, clients, or board members, and each conversation was filled with numbers, strategies, and deadlines. There was no mention of emotions, care, or laughter in his day. Everything was about efficiency, growth, and profit. He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The room was perfect in every way, furnished with the finest art, polished floors, and expensive lighting. Yet in the silence between the hums and clicks, he felt the weight of solitude pressing down on him. He thought of the childhood he had left behind, the friends he hadn't spoken to in years, the simple joys of climbing trees, reading under the sun, or hearing a loved one say, "I'm proud of you." Those memories felt distant, almost unreal, like dreams fading as soon as he tried to grasp them. Outside, the city never slept, its energy pulsing through the streets, cars honking, people rushing. But inside his office, time seemed paused, frozen in a bubble of silence. The walls reflected his life perfectly. Shiny, perfect, but cold. A faint sound of laughter from a nearby street broke his thoughts momentarily, and he almost smiled, but it faded quickly. He wasn't used to such human sounds anymore. To him, emotions had become a business strategy, feelings were risks, and closeness was vulnerability. That's how he had survived, that's how he had thrived. But now, in these quiet hours, he wondered if thriving meant anything at all if there was no one to share it with. He leaned forward, placing his hands on the polished desk, his fingers tapping lightly. Each tap seemed louder than the last, echoing his own heartbeat. He thought about inviting friends, but he realized he didn't have many left. He thought about family, but most of them were distant or disconnected. Even when they were close, he realized he had become a stranger to the world that mattered most. Inside his office, everything gleamed with perfection. The books aligned, the awards shining, the floor spotless. But perfection felt lonely, cold, and empty. A soft knock at the door made him glance up. It was unusual for anyone to enter without an appointment, but the door slowly opened, revealing a young girl. Standing timidly, her clothes were simple, her eyes wide with innocence, and there was a tiredness in her small frame that immediately tugged at something he didn't know still existed in him. He blinked, unsure what to say, as she hesitated before speaking. "Dad, Daddy, I'm so exhausted. Can I sit with you?" The words were simple, childlike, and honest, yet they struck him harder than any business deal, any contract, any negotiation, any success he had ever achieved could not compare to the vulnerability in that question. For a moment, he froze, his mind blank, and then the memories he had tried to bury slowly crept back. Memories of his own childhood, times when he longed for comfort, times when a hug or a kind word had meant more than anything else in the world. He watched the little girl, carefully, her small hands clutching her bag, her eyes looking up with hope. She wasn't asking for money or gifts or privileges. She only wanted to sit, to be close, to feel someone's presence beside her. And in that instant, he realized how much he had missed, how much he had lost in the pursuit of wealth. He gestured slowly toward the chair beside him, feeling an unfamiliar lump in his throat. The office, the city, the empire, all of it felt less important now. The moment was simple, quiet, and human, and it had more power than anything he had ever owned. He watched her sit, her little face relaxing as she leaned slightly toward him. And for the first time in years, he felt his heart open a little. The billionaire who had conquered the world outside was now facing a small, exhausted child who reminded him that life's most valuable moments couldn't be bought or planned. They sat together in silence. Yet the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with possibility, connection, and the faint stirring of emotions he had thought were gone forever. And in that silence, he realized that perhaps this small girl had just begun to teach him the most important lesson of all. That love, care, and human connection are more powerful than any fortune, more valuable than any success, and more fulfilling than anything money could ever buy. Outside, the city continued its busy rhythm. But inside the billionaire's office, a new story was quietly beginning, a story of change, of opening hearts, and of finding meaning in moments that seemed too simple to matter. And it all started with a little girl, a tired question, and the courage to simply say, "Can I sit with you?" The little girl hesitated for a moment before stepping fully into the billionaire's office. Her small shoes made soft tapping sounds on the polished floor. But to him, it was louder than the hum of any city. He could feel the exhaustion in her movements, the way her shoulders drooped, the slight tremble in her hands as she held her bag close. She looked like she had carried a day's worth of worries on her tiny frame. And yet there was something resilient in her eyes, something that refused to let the world crush her spirit. He watched silently as she slowly moved toward the chair he had gestured at. Her steps were careful, almost tentative, as if she were testing whether the world would allow her to be herself. No one had really stopped to notice her before. He realized no one had asked her if she was tired, if she needed comfort, if she simply wanted to be near someone who cared. She finally reached the chair and sat down with a soft sigh, letting her small body sink into the leather. It was as if the chair, so big and grand for an adult, now became a place of safety for her. He looked at her closely, noticing the tiny details he had never paid attention to before, the strands of hair falling gently across her forehead, the delicate curve of her lips, the way her fingers fidgeted with the strap of her bag. Every small movement spoke of her innocence, her struggles, and her courage. And in that moment, the billionaire felt something stir deep inside him, a feeling he had buried under years of ambition and solitude. "Are you okay?" he finally asked, his voice softer than he intended. The girl looked up at him, her eyes wide, and nodded slowly. "I'm just tired," she said quietly. "It's been a long day, and I wanted to be with you, Daddy." The word Daddy hit him like a sudden wave, washing over him with memories he had tried to forget, memories of his own childhood, of moments when he had longed for someone to just sit with him, to listen, to understand. But those moments had been fleeting, replaced by endless meetings, contracts, and responsibilities. He swallowed hard, feeling a lump in his throat that had not been there in years. He wanted to say something comforting, something wise, but no. Words seemed enough. Instead, he simply motioned for her to sit closer, and she did, her small hand brushing lightly against his. A spark of connection flickered between them, fragile but undeniable. She looked around the office with curiosity, her eyes taking in the tall bookshelves, the shiny awards, and the grand desk. But instead of being impressed by the wealth surrounding her, she seemed to be searching for something else, something real, something human. "Why do you sit here all alone?" she asked after a while, her voice quiet but sincere. He paused, thinking of all the times he had worked late nights, alone in this very chair, chasing deals and numbers. I guess I'm used to it," he said honestly. "I spend most of my time here because it's my work, my responsibility." She tilted her head slightly, studying him as if trying to understand the words behind the actions. "But doesn't it make you lonely?" she asked softly. Her question was simple, yet cut deeper than any business failure or lost deal ever could. Loneliness. That was the word he had been avoiding, the feeling he had tried to ignore, and now a small voice had named it. Bringing it to the surface, he swallowed again, unsure how to respond. She didn't push, didn't demand an answer. She just sat there, letting him wrestle with the truth of his own life. He finally sighed. a long, heavy sound, and admitted quietly, "Yes, sometimes it does," she smiled faintly. The kind of smile that carries understanding beyond words. "Then it's good you're letting me." "Sit here," she said simply. "I can keep you company." Her words were innocent, yet full of wisdom, and they made him realize how much he had missed in life by thinking that success meant being alone. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just a tired little girl, but a teacher, a reminder of what he had forgotten, of what truly mattered. "Thank you for sitting with me," he said softly, unsure why it felt so difficult to express such a simple sentiment. She nodded, and for a while, neither of them spoke, yet the silence was warm, comforting, and full of unspoken understanding. He noticed how she relaxed, her small body leaning slightly toward his chair, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the peace that came from closing a big deal or earning a fortune. It was the peace that came from human connection, from being seen, from letting someone be near him without any expectations. The girl glanced at the windows, the city lights, and then back at him. "Do you ever feel tired?" she asked, her voice curious. "Not tired like work, tired like life?" He considered the question, feeling the truth of it resonate within him. "Yes," he admitted. "I think everyone feels that way sometimes." She nodded, as if this was exactly what she expected to hear. "Then you should let people sit with you when you're tired," she said simply. "It helps," he smiled faintly, realizing how profound her words were, simple, childlike, but powerful. They sat together in silence again, and this time the silence felt full, not empty. Her presence brought warmth into the cold, polished office, and it reminded him of something he had long forgotten. The simple comfort of being close to someone who cares. Hours seemed to pass unnoticed, yet it didn't matter. The outside world, the city, the deals, and the deadlines had faded into the background. What mattered now was the small hand beside him, the tired eyes looking up with trust, and the quiet understanding between them. He thought about how strange life could be, how a small, exhausted girl could enter his office and change the way he felt about everything. He realized that in her simple question, she had given him a gift he hadn't known he needed, a chance to feel again, to open his heart, to connect. He reached out, placing a hand gently over hers, and she didn't pull away. She seemed to understand that this gesture wasn't just about comfort. It was about trust, acceptance, and connection. And in that moment, the billionaire understood that wealth and power meant nothing if you couldn't feel, if you couldn't let someone sit with you, share your silence, and see your heart outside. The city continued to move, fast and relentless, but inside the office, time slowed, allowing a little girl and a man who had everything to find something they had both been missing for years, a sense of belonging, a sense of warmth, and a reminder that sometimes the simplest moments are the most powerful. And so, they sat together, tired but connected, two hearts finding comfort in the quiet, in the presence of each other, and in the unspoken understanding that this small act of sitting together was the beginning of something far greater than money, fame, or success. It was the beginning of healing, love, and the rediscovery of what truly matters in life. The little girl shifted slightly in her chair, her small hands resting gently on her lap, and the billionaire watched her quietly, unsure of how to respond to the flood of emotions her presence had brought. It was as if her simple act of sitting beside him had pulled him out of years of solitude and reminded him of things he had almost forgotten. Things like care, warmth, and the gentle comfort of being noticed. He cleared his throat, trying to find the right words, but the truth was he had no idea how to explain why her presence mattered so much. "You seem tired," he said finally, his voice softer than he expected, almost breaking as he spoke. She nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting the long day she had endured. "I am," she whispered. "It's been a long day, school, helping at home, carrying things, everything." He felt a pang of guilt, realizing how little he knew about her life, how easily he had assumed that because she was small and quiet, her world was simple. But here she was, exhausted in ways he could barely imagine, yet still smiling faintly as if determined not to let her tiredness weigh down her spirit. "I see," he said quietly. "You've done a lot today." She nodded again, her gaze dropping to her hands. "Sometimes I wish someone would just notice," she said softly, and the words struck him harder than any business failure ever could. Notice? That was all she wanted. Nothing extravagant, nothing grand, just a little recognition, a little presence, a little care. And in that moment, he realized that all the money, all the power, all the titles he had acquired had never replaced that. He reached out hesitantly, letting his large hand hover near hers, unsure if she would flinch, unsure if this small gesture would mean anything to her. But she looked up at him and smiled faintly, as if understanding that sometimes comfort comes in the simplest forms. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the noise of the world fell away, leaving only the quiet understanding between them. She leaned slightly toward him, her small frame seeking warmth, not knowing and not needing to know that she was slowly breaking through walls he had spent decades building. "Daddy," she said after a while, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you ever feel lonely?" The question, innocent as it was, cut through him like a knife. Loneliness, he realized, was not just about being physically alone. It was about feeling unseen, unheard, untouchable, and disconnected from the world that truly mattered. He looked at her, this small, exhausted child who carried the weight of her day with such grace, and felt a lump forming in his throat. "Yes," he admitted softly, "sometimes I do." She nodded, as if she had expected the answer all along. "Then you need company," she said simply. "It helps, even if it's just a little." Her words, simple and pure, struck him in a way no speech, no negotiation, no success ever had. He realized that she wasn't just talking about herself. She was speaking to him, to the billionaire who had everything but had forgotten how to feel, how to let someone in, how to let someone sit beside him without judgment or expectation. He swallowed hard, feeling a warmth he hadn't known for years spreading through his chest. "Thank you for sitting with me," he said, his voice trembling slightly. I didn't realize how much I needed this," she smiled faintly, and the corners of her eyes crinkled in that way children have when they truly understand something beyond words. "It's okay," she said softly. "Sometimes people just need to sit together." The office, with all its grandeur, its polished floors, its expensive furniture, suddenly felt smaller, warmer, less intimidating. And he realized that the real luxury wasn't in the money, the awards, or the empire he had built. It was in these quiet, human moments, moments of connection, moments where someone trusted him enough to share their vulnerability. He remembered all the years he had spent alone, all the nights working late while the city slept, chasing deals, closing contracts, and achieving titles. Yet none of it had ever given him this feeling, this sense of being alive, being human, being part of something greater than himself. He watched her eyes slowly close for a brief moment, her small body relaxing in the chair, and felt a protective instinct he had long buried. The little girl wasn't just a child. She was a mirror, reflecting back all the parts of him he had ignored, the parts that longed for care, for touch, for acknowledgement. He reached over carefully, placing his hand on hers, a gentle, cautious touch. And she didn't move away. Instead, she looked up at him, trust shining in her tired eyes, and in that moment, he understood something profound. Sometimes it takes someone smaller, someone seemingly weaker, to make the strongest walls fall. He had built his empire thinking it would protect him, thinking it would make him invincible. But here was a tiny girl, exhausted and honest, who had done what no amount of wealth ever could. She had touched his heart. She leaned slightly closer, her voice soft but firm. "Daddy, can we just sit like this for a while?" He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat, feeling tears threatening to spill. "Yes," he whispered, "we can just sit." They sat together in silence, yet the silence was full of warmth, trust, and the beginnings of a connection that could change both their lives. He realized that this was not just a fleeting moment, that it was the start of something important, something that reminded him that even the smallest acts of care could have the biggest impact. He thought about all the people he had neglected, the relationships he had ignored, the love he had left unexplored, and he felt a mixture of regret and hope. Regret for the time lost, hope for the time that could still be reclaimed. The little girl's presence, her exhaustion, her honesty, had reminded him that life was not about the empire outside the window, but about the people who needed you, who trusted you, who allowed you to be part of their world. Hours passed unnoticed, yet it didn't matter. The city outside kept moving, cars honking, lights flashing, but inside the office there was a stillness, a sacred quiet where two hearts, one big, one small, were finding comfort in each other. He realized that the tears threatening to fall were not weakness. They were proof of life, proof of feeling, proof of being human. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel fully, to feel the weight of his past, the emptiness he had carried, and the hope that still existed for the future. He squeezed her small hand gently, and she leaned just a little closer, trusting him completely, not knowing how much impact she had had, not knowing that her simple act of sitting, of asking to be near him, was already changing him forever. And in that quiet office, amidst the silence and the soft hum of the city, a billionaire who had everything and a little girl who had so little discovered something neither could have bought. A connection, pure and simple, that made the world seem a little brighter, a little warmer, and a little more human. And as they sat there, side by side, he realized that life's most valuable moments were not in achievements, contracts, or fame. They were in these quiet, shared moments of honesty, trust, and care, moments that could heal hearts, bridge loneliness, and remind even the richest man in the world of what truly matters. As the little girl sat beside him, the billionaire's mind began to wander in a way it hadn't for years. The softness of her presence, the trust in her eyes, and the simplicity of her question had unlocked a door he didn't even know existed. Memories from his own childhood began to surface, unbidden and sharp. He remembered being small, tired, and overlooked in a house that was too quiet, a home where love had been distant, and warmth had to be earned, not through money or gifts, but through effort, attention, and moments of true care. He saw his younger self sitting on a wooden bench in the garden, exhausted after a long day at school, longing for someone to notice him, to ask, "Are you okay?" or to simply sit beside him and hold his hand, but no one had, and he had learned to hide his exhaustion, to hide his emotions, and to hide his heart behind a carefully built wall of independence and pride. The little girl's small hand resting near his now reminded him of all those missed moments, of all the times he had ignored the quiet cries for comfort that life had presented to him. He could almost see his younger self in her. The same tired eyes, the same longing, the same quiet hope that someone, anyone, would just be present. He realized that life had repeated itself in a strange way. Here was a child, trusting him, needing him, reminding him of what he had long forgotten. And the memories didn't stop there. They went further back, to a father he had loved but rarely understood, to moments where affection was present but awkward, to conversations left unsaid, to hugs that never lasted long enough. He remembered the one time his father had tried to hold him after a defeat, how he had turned away, thinking strength meant hiding pain, thinking independence meant refusing comfort. Now, decades later, sitting beside this little girl, he understood that his own mistakes had been a product of not learning to accept care, to accept love, to accept presence. His chest tightened as he thought about all the years spent chasing deals, money, and power, believing that success would fill the emptiness. And yet, here he was, wealthy beyond imagination, surrounded by all the luxuries one could want, but it had taken a child's simple trust to remind him that no amount of gold could replace human connection. The little girl yawned softly, leaning slightly closer to him, and the sight made something inside him ache. He reached out almost instinctively, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and she leaned into the gesture without hesitation. The warmth of her body, her quiet presence, and her simple honesty made him realize how little he had allowed himself to feel in years. It was as if her innocence had cracked the walls around his heart, letting the long-suppressed emotions seep through. He remembered times in his life when he had tried to replace love with objects, when he had thought that buying someone's time or attention could make up for emotional absence, and now he understood the foolishness of that belief. as nothing in his vast empire could teach him what this small girl was teaching him in a single glance. He remembered a time when he had been young, scared, and alone in a hotel room on a business trip, missing his family, missing the comfort of being held, and feeling like the world was too big and too cold. All those nights of silent crying, all those hours of pretending, all those moments of pretending to be strong. They came rushing back now, and he realized that the exhaustion the little girl felt wasn't just physical. It was emotional, the same kind of tiredness he had carried for decades, the kind that no sleep or comfort could truly fix, only understanding, connection, and love could. He looked at her again, her eyes half closed, small breaths coming slowly, and he felt an overwhelming urge to protect her, to care for her, and to ensure she never felt as alone as he had. "I wish someone had sat with me when I was your age," he whispered softly, almost to himself. "I wish I had known that it was okay to be tired, to need someone, to ask for help." She tilted her head slightly, sensing the emotion in his voice, though she didn't fully understand it. "But now you're here," she said quietly, "and I'm glad." The billionaire felt a lump rise in his throat, tears threatening to spill. The simplicity of her words, her gentle honesty, reminded him that life wasn't about perfection, success, or recognition. It was about presence, about being there, about caring without expectation. He remembered the countless moments he had ignored, the birthdays he had missed, the late-night phone calls he had not answered, the children he had never comforted, the friends he had pushed away in the pursuit of ambition. And for the first time, he allowed himself to feel regret, not as shame, but as clarity, as understanding of what truly mattered. He realized that the empire he had built was meaningless, without human connection. And here, sitting beside this tired little girl, he understood that connection, even in its simplest form, was priceless. He thought about the life he wanted to live moving forward, one where he wouldn't just be wealthy, powerful, and respected, but where he would also be present, where he would notice the quiet ones, where he would offer care, comfort, and love freely. The little girl stirred slightly, and he instinctively put a hand gently on her back, guiding her to sit closer, to feel safe, to feel seen. She looked up at him, her eyes still heavy with exhaustion, yet sparkling with trust, and in that moment he realized that teaching her wasn't necessary. It was enough that he was learning to be human again, to be open, to allow connection, to feel without fear. He remembered the countless boardrooms, the important meetings, the endless calculations of profit and loss. And he understood now that none of it compared to this moment, to this presence, to this simple act of sitting together. He could feel the weight of the years lifting slightly, replaced by a warmth he had forgotten existed, a warmth brought not by money or success, but by trust, by honesty, and by vulnerability. And as he sat there, lost in memories, reflections, and realizations, he understood something profound. Life is not measured by wealth or accomplishments, but by the connections we make, the lives we touch, and the moments we share without expectation. The little girl yawned again, leaning slightly into him, and he allowed himself to feel fully, to feel deeply, to allow the flood of emotions he had resisted for so long to wash over him. And in the quiet of the office, surrounded by wealth but touched by innocence, he discovered that the past, though filled with mistakes and missed moments, could still lead to understanding, growth, and change. He looked at her, this small, tired girl who had unknowingly become his teacher, and felt an overwhelming gratitude, for she had shown him the value of care, the power of presence, and the importance of allowing oneself to be human. In that quiet office, amidst the soft hum of the city outside, the billionaire realized that he had finally begun to understand what it truly meant to live, to love, and to feel, and that sometimes it only takes the courage of a child to open the heart of a man who thought he had everything but had forgotten the most important thing of all, connection. The little girl shifted in her chair again, curling her small hands around the edge of her bag, and the billionaire watched her quietly, feeling a strange mixture of protectiveness and wonder. He had never realized how much presence a single person could demand without saying much. The quiet, the stillness, and the subtle trust she offered were more powerful than any deal he had ever closed. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on his knees, trying to bridge the invisible gap that years of wealth and detachment had built around him. "Would you like me to tell you a story?" he asked softly, almost hesitant, unsure if he could even remember how to speak gently. She looked up, her eyes brightening with a faint spark of curiosity. "Yes, please," she whispered, her voice small but eager. And just like that, a moment that might have seemed ordinary to anyone else became extraordinary to him. He took a deep breath, searching for the words that would connect with a child who had already taught him so much without trying. "When I was your age," he began slowly, "I used to dream of being strong, of being independent, of having everything I wanted." She listened intently, tilting her head as if each word was a treasure. "But I didn't know that being strong didn't mean hiding your feelings. And having everything didn't mean having what truly matters," he continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I spent years building an empire, making sure I had everything, but I forgot to make space for love, for family, for moments like this." The girl's small hand reached out tentatively, brushing against his, and he felt a warmth spread through him that no luxury could ever provide. She smiled faintly, understanding more than words could say. "I think you forgot because no one ever told you it was okay," she said softly. "But now I'm here," he nodded, feeling tears welling up in his eyes, realizing the simplicity and power of her words. "Yes, now you're here," he whispered. And it makes all the difference. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself to cry softly, tears slipping down his cheeks unnoticed by the city beyond the windows, unnoticed by the world that usually demanded perfection. She leaned closer, placing her small hand over his, and he felt the walls around his heart begin to crumble. The sound of her breathing, slow and steady, the rise and fall of her chest, the faint scent of innocence. Everything reminded him of what he had lost. By prioritizing work over presence. "Daddy, can you tell me about when you were little?" she asked after a while, her voice gentle and curious. He smiled faintly, wiping a tear away. "I was much like you, tired at times, wanting someone to notice me, to sit with me, to just be there." She nodded, absorbing his words, and he noticed how much her presence calmed him, how much it made the busy, loud, and empty office feel like a home. "Sometimes I still feel that way," he admitted softly. "Even now, even after all these years of working hard, I still feel small. I still feel like I need someone beside me." Her eyes widened slightly, filled with understanding, and she whispered, "Then it's good you let me sit here." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight far greater than any advice, any wisdom he had acquired over a lifetime. For a moment, the billionaire realized that the girl was teaching him a lesson he hadn't learned in decades. That vulnerability was not weakness, and connection was not a risk. It was strength, courage, and a source of real joy. He leaned back slightly, letting the chair absorb his weight, feeling her small hand still resting near his. "I don't know why it's taken me so long to understand this," he murmured, "but you've reminded me what it feels like to be human, to be present, to care." She smiled faintly. "That's what I do, Daddy," she said simply. "I remind people to feel." Her words made him laugh softly, a sound that felt foreign but comforting. He realized that life, no matter how complicated, didn't need to be solved with money, contracts, or strategy. Life could be simple. Life could be quiet. Life could be shared in moments like this. She shifted again, leaning her small head slightly against his arm, and he placed his hand gently over hers, feeling the warmth of trust and the fragile beginnings of love. He began to share stories from his childhood, stories he hadn't told anyone in years, about quiet nights, moments of disappointment, and fleeting joys, and she listened, eyes wide, soaking in every word, asking small questions that made him think, reflect, and feel. With every story, he realized he was not only teaching her, but also reconnecting with parts of himself he had long forgotten. Each laugh, each sigh, Each question bridged the gap between the man he had been and the man he could become. He noticed the little details, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way her small feet dangled slightly above the floor, the way her tired eyes still held hope. And he understood that life's beauty often came in these quiet, overlooked moments. Hours seemed to pass, yet the room felt timeless, a bubble of warmth in a world that demanded speed, efficiency, and perfection. And for the first time in years, he wasn't the billionaire, the businessman, or the empire builder. He was simply a human being, sitting beside another human being, sharing stories, sharing silence, and sharing trust. "Daddy, you think I could visit more often?" she asked softly, almost shyly. He looked at her, his heart swelling with a newfound understanding. Yes, of course," he said gently. "You can visit whenever you want, and we can sit together, just like this," she smiled, relief and happiness shining in her tired eyes, and he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known in decades. It wasn't the wealth, the power, or the recognition that gave him this feeling, but the quiet trust, the innocent curiosity, and the gentle presence of a small, exhausted girl. "I think," he said softly, almost to himself, "that I've been waiting for this moment for a very long time." She looked up at him, eyes full of wonder. "Then maybe we both needed it," she said simply. And he realized she was right, that her presence had healed more than her own exhaustion. It had healed him, too. He felt a weight lifting, a lightness returning to his chest, as if the walls around his heart had begun to crumble, making space for care, connection, and love. And in that quiet office, amidst the hum of the city and the glow of the evening lights, the billionaire discovered something priceless, something he hadn't bought or earned, something far greater than any empire he had built. The gift of presence, trust, and human connection. He realized that life's true success was not measured by wealth or power, but by the moments where hearts met, where vulnerabilities were shared, and where small, simple acts created lasting impact. And as the little girl rested slightly against him, the exhaustion from her day slowly giving way to comfort, he knew that this moment, this connection, was the beginning of something transformative, something that would change both their lives forever. For in teaching him how to feel again, how to open his heart, and how to care without expectation, she had given him a gift no wealth could ever buy. And as they sat there, side by side, sharing silence, stories, and the quiet power of trust, he understood that sometimes the smallest presence can have the greatest impact, and the simplest act, allowing someone to sit with you, can change a life, not just theirs but yours. The office was quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside. But inside, something extraordinary was happening. The billionaire had never felt anything like it. An emotion so raw, so overwhelming, that it left him frozen for a moment, staring at the small girl beside him. She shifted slightly, sensing the tension but not afraid. She trusted him, even though she didn't fully understand the weight of the man's feelings. And he realized that trust, such a fragile thing, had been missing from his life for far too long. A tear rolled down his cheek before he could stop it. And then another. They weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of release, of realization, of a lifetime of suppressed emotions finally surfacing. He covered his face with one hand, trying to hide the sudden vulnerability, but she reached out, her small hand resting gently on his arm. "Daddy, it's okay," she whispered softly. "You can cry. I'm here." Her words, simple and innocent, struck him harder than any business defeat, any failure, any disappointment he had ever faced. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw nothing but care, understanding, and unconditional acceptance. And in that moment, decades of loneliness, regret, and emotional walls came crashing down. He remembered the countless times he had pushed people away, thinking that he had to be strong, thinking that showing emotion was weakness, thinking that his wealth and power could replace love and care. But now, sitting beside this small, exhausted girl, he understood how wrong he had been, how empty life had been without connection, without vulnerability, without trust. He let himself sob quietly, small hiccups escaping him as he struggled to regain composure. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't judge. She simply stayed there, offering her presence, her warmth, and her comfort. And that was all he needed. That was all anyone could ever need. She leaned closer, resting her small head gently against his side, and he felt a profound sense of relief, as if a lifetime of burdens had suddenly been lifted. Each tear that fell seemed to carry away years of pain, neglect, and emotional distance. He realized that all the money, all the achievements, all the luxuries he had acquired were meaningless compared to this moment of genuine human connection. He thought about the nights spent alone in penthouses and hotels, the endless business calls, the lonely dinners, and the missed birthdays. And for the first time, he truly understood what it meant to be alive, to feel, to care, and to let someone in. I didn't realize how much I needed this, he whispered through his tears. I didn't realize how lonely I had been. She looked up at him, eyes wide, innocent and wise in a way that only children can be. Then it's good I'm here, she said softly, so you don't have to feel lonely anymore. He laughed softly between sobs, a strange, shaky sound that was half relief, half disbelief. He had conquered businesses, countries, and fortunes, yet it took a small, tired girl to conquer the walls he had built around his own heart. He thought about the years wasted, the love he had denied himself, the moments he had let slip by, and yet he didn't dwell on regret for long, because here now he had a chance to begin again, to be present, to feel, to love, to connect. He looked down at her tiny hand, still resting on his arm, and gently took it in his, feeling the softness, the trust, and the courage it carried. Thank you, he said quietly. Thank you for reminding me what it feels like to be human, what it feels like to care. She smiled faintly, leaning closer, and he felt the walls inside him crumble even further. The office, once cold and sterile, now felt warm, alive, and comforting. The hum of the city outside seemed distant, insignificant compared to the life, the warmth, and the presence in that small room. He remembered his own childhood, the times he had longed for someone to simply sit with him, to notice him, to care, and he realized that he had carried that longing into every aspect of his adult life, chasing power and wealth to fill the emptiness that could only be healed by human connection. And now, sitting beside a child, he understood that the healing he needed had arrived in the most unexpected form. The little girl shifted again, yawned softly, and whispered, "Daddy, will you always sit with me when I'm tired?" He nodded, tears still falling, a mixture of joy and relief swelling in his chest. "Always," he promised, "I'll always be here for you." And in that promise, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, peace, and a sense of purpose. She leaned her head against him again, breathing slowly and comfortably, and he wrapped an arm gently around her, holding her close without fear, without hesitation, without shame. For the first time, he allowed himself to be vulnerable, to be present, to let someone see his heart in its raw, unguarded state. And he realized that this vulnerability was strength, a strength far greater than any business skill, any wealth, any power. The tears continued to fall, but they were no longer just for him. They were for the little girl, for the moments she had endured alone, for the innocence she had preserved despite exhaustion, for the trust she had offered him so freely. He thought about the future, the changes he would make, the connections he would nurture, and the love he would allow into his life. And he realized that it all began with this one simple moment, this one question, this one act of courage from a small child. "Daddy, I'm so exhausted. Can I sit with you?" He smiled through the tears, holding her hand tightly, and whispered, "Yes, you can always sit with me." She smiled faintly in return, and for the first time in decades, he felt whole, alive, and deeply, truly human. The billionaire who had everything and yet had felt nothing in years now understood that wealth was nothing without love, success was empty without connection, and power was meaningless without the courage to feel. And as they sat together in the quiet office, amidst the soft glow of city lights and the gentle hum of the world beyond, he realized that sometimes the greatest miracles do not come from grand gestures, but from small, simple acts of trust, presence, and vulnerability. A little girl, exhausted and honest, had taught him what no business, no achievement, no empire ever could. That the heart, when opened, can heal, transform, and create bonds stronger than anything money can buy. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by wealth, but touched by innocence, he knew that his life had changed forever, not because of what he had, but because of who had chosen to sit with him, and that sometimes the greatest gift in life is simply allowing someone to sit beside you, feel your presence, and share your heart. The next morning, the billionaire woke to a quiet he hadn't known for years. The city outside his window was alive with movement, car horns blaring, people rushing to work, and the hum of life carrying on as it always did. Yet inside, he felt something different, something light, something warm, something that hadn't been there before. He stretched slowly, remembering the night before, the little girl's small hand in his, her trust, her honesty, and the way she had broken through the walls. Around his heart, for decades, he had lived in a bubble of wealth and ambition, believing that success meant isolation, that power meant strength, and that emotions were weaknesses to be hidden. But now, sitting on the edge of his bed, he realized that real strength was allowing yourself to feel, and real success was nurturing the connections that made life meaningful. He dressed carefully, but his thoughts were not on meetings or investments. They were on the little girl, on the quiet lessons she had taught him, on the trust she had placed in him without question. He walked through the mansion, noticing details he had never paid attention to before. The sunlight spilling through the windows, the faint scent of flowers from the garden, the quiet stillness of a home that had once felt like a prison. And he realized that this world, this empire, had never truly felt like home until he allowed someone to share it with him. When the little girl arrived later that day, she seemed even more tired than the day before. Yet there was a spark in her eyes, a quiet excitement that made him smile. "Good morning," he said gently, crouching slightly so he could be at her level. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded, rubbing her eyes. "I slept okay, but I'm still tired," she admitted. I just want to sit with you again." And in those words, he saw a simple truth. Her trust had not been given lightly, and he had a responsibility to honor it. "Of course," he said softly, guiding her to the chair beside him. "You can sit here as long as you want," she smiled faintly, settling into the chair. And he watched her for a moment, feeling the quiet power of presence. "Daddy," she said after a while, "do you ever feel like life is too big?" He looked at her, understanding exactly what she meant. "Yes," he said quietly. "Sometimes life feels so big, so heavy, so full of expectations, that it's easy to forget what really matters," she nodded. And he could see the relief in her eyes, as if someone had finally said aloud what she had been feeling too. He realized then that the little girl had not only taught him to feel again, but she had also given him a new purpose, a chance to do better, to be better, to live differently, he decided. That day to make changes, small at first, but meaningful. He called his assistant and canceled unnecessary meetings, choosing instead to spend time with people who mattered, not just clients and colleagues, but friends, family, and those who needed his presence. He began to notice the quiet moments, the way a neighbor smiled, the way a gardener tended the flowers, the way the sun highlighted the curves of the furniture. And he realized that beauty was everywhere if only you took the time to see it. The little girl noticed the changes too, and her faint smile grew wider each day. She no longer had to ask for his attention. He offered it freely, listening when she spoke, sharing stories when she asked, and simply sitting in silence when that was all that was needed. Their bond deepened with each passing moment, built not on grand gestures or gifts, but on trust, care, and genuine presence. One afternoon, as they sat together in the office, the billionaire looked at her and said softly, "You know, you've changed my life." She blinked, her eyes wide with innocence. "Really?" she asked. "Yes," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Because you reminded me what it feels like to care, to trust, to be human, and I promise I will never forget it." She leaned closer, resting her head gently on his arm. "I'm glad I could help," she whispered. "That's what I do," he smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and joy filling his chest. For decades, he had thought that wealth, power, and success were the goals of life. But now he understood that the true treasure lay in connection, in the small, quiet moments shared with those who matter. Over the next few weeks, the billionaire made a conscious effort to change his routine. He spent mornings with the little girl, listening to her stories about school, her dreams, her worries, and her simple observations about life. He found joy in teaching her small things, like how to make a simple meal, how to organize her schoolwork, and how to notice the beauty in ordinary moments. She, in turn, taught him patience, humility, and the power of quiet strength. He also began to reconnect with family members he had long neglected, calling old friends, visiting relatives, and even volunteering in the community. Each step felt strange at first, but the warmth and fulfillment he felt made the discomfort worthwhile. One evening, as they sat together after a long day, the little girl asked softly, "Daddy, do you feel different now?" He looked at her, his eyes reflecting years of change. "Yes," he said quietly. "I feel alive again because I've learned that life is not about having everything, but about sharing everything that matters." She smiled faintly, and he realized that this small child had taught him the most important lesson of his life, that success without love and connection is empty. The billionaire also began to notice subtle changes in himself. He laughed more freely, cried without fear, and allowed himself to be vulnerable in ways he had thought impossible. The office, once cold and distant, now felt alive, welcoming and full of warmth, not just because of the people, but because of the presence and trust of a small girl who had entered his life unexpectedly. Friends and colleagues began to notice the change too. His decisions, once purely strategic, now carried empathy and understanding, and his interactions, once cold and transactional, now carried care and attention. He realized that the little girl had not only changed his heart, but also transformed the way he lived in the world. He became more mindful, more patient, and more willing to embrace the small joys of life. He noticed the sun glinting off the windows, the laughter of children outside, the smell of flowers in the garden, and he felt a sense of gratitude that had been missing for decades. And through it all, the little girl remained by his side, sometimes quiet, sometimes full of questions, always trusting, always teaching, always reminding him that the smallest presence can create the biggest change. One afternoon, she looked up at him with tired eyes and asked, "Daddy, do you think I've changed you for the better?" He smiled, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. "More than you'll ever know," he said softly, "because you reminded me what truly matters in life. And for that, I will be forever grateful." She nodded faintly, leaning slightly into him, and he realized that their bond was no longer just about presence. It was about growth, healing, and love. The billionaire who had once thought he had everything now understood that the real wealth of life lay in relationships, trust, and the quiet moments of connection that made life meaningful. And as they sat together in the glow of the evening sun, the city outside bustling with endless noise and chaos, days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Yet the little girl's presence in the billionaire's life never waned. She had become more than just a visitor to his office. She was a part of the rhythm of his days, a gentle reminder of what truly mattered. Each morning, she arrived with a shy smile, a school bag slung over her shoulder, and eyes that carried the weight of the world, yet shone with an unbroken spirit. And each morning, he greeted her with the warmth he had thought lost forever, guiding her to the chair beside him, letting her sit, letting her exist fully, without judgment, without distraction. She had taught him to slow down, to notice the small details, the fleeting moments, and the quiet beauty of life. Before her, the office had been a place of numbers, contracts, and endless responsibilities. But now it had become a sanctuary, filled with laughter, trust, and gentle conversation. He noticed the subtle ways she had changed him, the way he smiled more freely, the way he listened more patiently, the way he allowed himself to feel without fear. Each day, he made a conscious effort to be present, to truly see her, to notice the tired curve of her shoulders, the strands of hair falling over her eyes, the faint sparkle in her gaze when she discovered something new. And in those small, quiet acts, he found joy, peace, and purpose he had never known. One afternoon, as they sat together in silence, She leaned slightly against him and whispered softly, "Daddy, do you think I've made a difference in your life?" He looked at her, his eyes reflecting years of gratitude, love, and humility. "You've changed everything," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "because you reminded me what it means to care, to feel, to love, and to trust again." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carries both innocence and wisdom, and it struck him how profound her simple presence had been. It wasn't just that she had brought warmth to his life. It was that she had healed wounds he hadn't known existed. Wounds left by years of isolation, ambition, and unspoken longing. Over time, their bond became unbreakable, not because of grand gestures, but because of the countless small moments they shared. The quiet conversations, the soft laughter, the unspoken trust. The billionaire began to notice changes in himself outside the office as well. He approached his business differently, with empathy and understanding. He nurtured relationships long ignored. He invested time and care into people who mattered, not just projects or profits. And the world responded in unexpected ways. Friendships deepened, respect grew, and a quiet happiness settled over his life that no amount of wealth could ever buy. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light into the office, the little girl looked up at him with tired eyes and asked, "Daddy, do you feel happy now?" He paused, thinking carefully, feeling the full weight of her question. He realized that true happiness wasn't found in achievements, titles, or money. It was in moments like this, moments of trust, care, and connection. "Yes," he said softly, a smile spreading across his face. "I'm happy because I've learned to feel, to love, and to let someone in." She leaned her small head against him, breathing slowly and comfortably, and he felt a profound sense of completeness, a peace he had never known. Days later, they sat together as the city lights sparkled beyond the windows, and he watched her, noticing the quiet strength she carried despite exhaustion. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "you've taught me more than anyone ever has, and I think you've changed me forever." She looked up, curiosity and pride shining in her eyes. "Really?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said, holding her small hand gently. "You've taught me that life isn't about having everything, but about noticing what really matters, about being present, about trusting, loving, and caring without expectation." She smiled faintly. "Then I'm glad I came to sit with you," she whispered, and he felt a warmth that no wealth could provide. Weeks turned into months, and their bond strengthened with every shared moment. She began to open up more, telling him stories of school, her dreams, her worries, and her small discoveries about the world. And he listened, genuinely, fully, letting himself be moved, inspired, and, taught by her innocence and honesty, he began to teach her as well. Not just about money or business, but about life, responsibility, courage, and compassion. He showed her that success meant integrity, that wealth meant responsibility, and that true power came from kindness, patience, and empathy. And she absorbed everything, her eyes wide with curiosity and admiration. She had not only changed his heart, but she was shaping the person he wanted to be, not for himself, but for her. For the first time, he understood that his legacy wasn't measured by the empire he built, but by the lives he touched, the hearts he healed, and the love he shared. One chilly evening, as they sat together watching the city lights, the little girl asked softly, "Daddy, will you always be here for me?" He held her small hand firmly, looking into her eyes with unwavering sincerity. "Always," he said, "no matter what, I'll always be here." And in that promise, he felt the depth of his transformation. The walls around his heart had not only fallen, but they had been replaced with care, empathy, and an unshakable commitment to love and presence. She smiled, a tired but genuine smile, and he realized that happiness, real happiness, was not something to chase, but something to live through. Connection, trust, and shared moments. Months later, friends and colleagues noticed a change in him. They noticed how he listened, how he cared, how he approached life with newfound patience and humility. They didn't know the little girl who had inspired this transformation, but they could feel its impact in every interaction, every decision, every conversation. Every gesture was now infused with warmth and awareness. And he felt a quiet pride, not in his business achievements, but in the life he was building, a life full of love, trust, presence, and quiet happiness. One day, as they sat together, she whispered softly, "Daddy, thank you." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No, thank you," he replied, "for reminding me that life is about more than what we have. It's about who we are with, how we love, and how we care." She leaned closer, her small hand resting in his, and he felt a sense of completion he had never imagined possible. He realized that she had not only changed his life, but had also become a part of it in the deepest, most meaningful way. From that day forward, the billionaire never spent another moment in solitude without remembering the little girl who had taught him to live, to feel, and to love. She had entered his life exhausted and weary, yet in doing so, she had filled it with light, warmth, and purpose, and he knew, without a doubt, that some miracles weren't grand or impossible. They were quiet, small, and human, like a tired little girl asking to sit beside a man who thought he had everything. Yet, in that simple act, they had found everything that truly mattered. And, as the sun set, casting golden hues over the city, they sat together, side by side, two hearts intertwined by trust, love, and presence, knowing that their lives had changed forever, in the simplest, most beautiful way possible.